2 years ago, the Texas Freedom Network stood with advocates, many who are also here today, to ask the State Board of Education to help more school districts that want to offer elective courses in Mexican American studies. So of course, we were immediately concerned when we discovered that the only textbook submitted for the board's consideration this year for Mexican American studies courses came from a company run by Cynthia Dunbar. As a reminder, Cynthia Dunbar is a former member of the Texas State Board of Education. Why would a former member of the State Board of Education who has called public schools a tool of perversion now try to sell a textbook that why would someone who called public schools a tool of perversion now try to sell a textbook to those same public schools? We were also concerned that the textbook included so much coverage of issues that Cynthia Dunbar has spent her political career promoting. The Texas Freedom Network has long advocated that the State Board of Education listen closely to subject matter experts when making decisions regarding curricula and instructional materials. And we are pleased that so many experts like the ones you have heard from today have reviewed this proposed text. We also asked respected scholars we have worked with in the past to review the textbook. And I want to talk very briefly about the findings of one of those scholars, Dr. Emil Lester, an associate professor of political science and international studies at the University of Mary Washington in Virginia. As you've heard, this textbook is clearly about a lot more than Mexican American history and Mexican American heritage. So we asked Dr. Lester, an Americanist, to review those other aspects of the textbook. Unfortunately, Dr. Lester's review mirrors what you have heard from the scholars today. He notes a number of ways in which the textbook promotes political arguments that certain politicians, including Ms. Dunbar, often promote, but that historians have rejected. In fact, the textbook ignores the important role the separation of church and state plays in barring government from favoring or disfavoring any particular religion over all others. And it suggests that our Constitution and government are based on Christian principles and biblical principles. It also promotes the myth that the Civil War was fought over states' rights and disagreements over the power of the national government. Historians have repeatedly rejected that argument and have made clear that slavery was the central cause of the Civil War. But perhaps most appalling of all, the textbook perversely blames the widespread and violent repression of freed slaves after the Civil War on the supposed persecution of white Southerners. Sadly, we've seen efforts to infuse political beliefs and biases into textbooks before. But it is critical that our State Board of Education put facts and scholarship ahead of personal political belief when it comes to educating our kids. So we have joined the Responsible Ethnic Studies Textbook Coalition and stand here once again calling on the State Board of Education to put expertise ahead of politics. Listen to these scholars and reject this textbook. Thank you. If there are any questions, we've got folks here who would be happy to answer them. Does anyone have any?
Can you talk about some of the contemporary issues that were discussed in the book, including their take on illegal immigration and bilingualism? We would feel that some of the things in there would seem a little inaccurate or colored in its way.
Well, I'll take that on, but first let me say that the book is obviously a fraud, that it doesn't really address the subject of Mexican American history according to the standards of the history profession and according to the established record of scholarship on Mexican American history. They either don't know the record or they deliberately disregard it, and that is why I say it's a fraud. And I cannot see how the State Board of Education, in their right mind, could adopt this book. It is offensive not only to the community of Mexican Americans and the scholars, but I think it's very offensive to our students and teachers who deserve an opportunity to talk about history in a balanced way, in a fair way, in a way that promotes not only the content, but the value of understanding, the value of empathy that we so sorely need in our times. We need to build bridges across all the divides that we have, and Mexican American history does that. It is not just simply asking for more space for the content area. It is also promoting important values and academic skills. I want to underscore that, and to disregard all that work for the last 40 years of very well-trained and recognized scholars and others in related fields of history, I think is offensive and makes the work for all. Now, with regards to omissions, my major concern with the omissions, although there's a lot of factual errors and interpretation mistakes, I was particularly moved by the omission of organizations in the 20th century and the beginning of the 20th century. The omission of very important legal struggles by MALDEF, for example, that have made a big difference for the society in Texas as a whole and throughout the country. The MALDEF organization is a very important organization in Mexican American history in the contemporary period. To leave that out is, and only mention it once or twice is a disservice to the profession of history and also to the teachers and students. They also disregard the very rich history of LULAC. They also disregard, let me go back a bit, very important figures in Mexican American history. Jose de la Luz Sainz, a co-founder of LULAC and the author of the only World War I diary coming out of Texas, is not mentioned at all. This is one of the most important figures in Mexican American history. Saracela Ramirez, a poet from the border, who was very important, not only in the area of journalism and the arts, but was also very involved in international politics. There are many other omissions of very important organizations and individuals that are problematic in this book.
I do want to mention that as reviews are completed, they will be posted on the mossfortexas.org website. So as more scholars are reviewing this book from around the country, you can find that information there. Were there other questions?
Could you talk a little bit about the next steps organizationally and with regard to the board's process that you're planning to try to prevent the textbook from being adopted?
So we hope that Texans around the state will learn about the problems with this book, will sign a petition that is available on mossfortexas.org that can be delivered to the State Board of Education members. We anticipate, although the State Board changes their schedule on a regular basis, we anticipate that they will have a public hearing on this textbook in September, and hope that many scholars, like the ones we were joined by today and more, will come and talk to the State Board of Education about the many errors and problems with the textbook. And we anticipate a final vote in November.
If I may make a comment.
Sure.
I know that you mentioned specifically about immigration. I don't think that was answered, but in the book, which I have read also, by the way, my name is Juan Tejeda.
Great.
I'm an instructor of Mexican American Studies and Music at Palo Alto College in San Antonio, Texas, and part of Somos Mas, and part of the committee that's reviewing this book. But in terms of immigration, I don't have the quote exactly here in front of me, but there's a number of quotes that very negatively depict immigrants, particularly Mexican and other Central and South American immigrants, but in particular Mexican immigrants to the United States, as basically being uneducated, criminals, and contributing to almost the drug dealers. I mean, this was almost taken out a page right out of like the Donald Trump book of the way he views immigrants from Mexico and Central and South America. very negatively when study after study have continuously repeated the facts that immigrants, and particularly Mexican and Central South American immigrants here to the United States, contribute vastly to the economy of this country. Our entrepreneurs pay taxes, are law-abiding citizens. So continues the very negative and stereotypical depiction of Mexican and other people that immigrate here. So we are against that.
I want to thank you all for coming today.
I just want to mention one quick thing. I just want to say that Mexicans are not immigrants. They are not illegal. They are migrating like their indigenous ancestors have been doing for thousands of years. That artificial border was placed there by the U.S. government after it waged an illegal, unfair war against Mexico. The U.S. Southwest is still our sacred ancestral motherland. This is our land. We're not illegal.
I want to thank you all for coming today.
Thank you for coming, and I just wanted to let you know that there are people for Spanish language media, there are people who would be available for interviews in Spanish. Thank you so much.